You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your committed to disbelief host, Abraham.
And I'm your reptilian overlord host, Shane.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
We are a psychology podcast, and we like to talk all the things about psychology things and behavior stuff. We're kind of experts on this a little bit.
Somewhat, I would say.
Yeah.
I think that we have a good base knowledge.
Somewhere above armchair.
Yeah.
And somewhere below people who should actually be making this podcast.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice in between. That means that we are of the people.
That's
I
right.
would say.
And just really good at what we do, I think.
Yeah.
If you end up liking today's episode, what you should do about that is subscribe and like and share and maybe join us on Patreon, send us a check in the mail, buy some merch, that sort of stuff. I'll talk more about that when we get to the end. Some other things is that this episode is going to come out on August 31st. Woot. Mm-hmm. You may not know this, but August 31st has a bunch of holidays that we can celebrate. Mm-hmm. So on August 31st, let's recognize that it is International Overdose Awareness Day. So bringing awareness to the fact that overdoses happen. Yep.
It's also Love Litigating Lawyers Day. So that seems like a little bit of an oxymoron, but here we are.
Yeah, I definitely think I know who came up with this holiday. And I don't know. It seems like saying like Love Frivolous Lawsuits Day. And I'm like, but should we have a day for that?
Yeah, I agree that in a litigious country, I don't know that we really need this anymore.
Exactly. It's also National Eat Outside Day. So if you're planning on having your lunch or breakfast, do it outside.
Yeah, just be aware of ants and bears that steal your picnic baskets.
Indeed.
It's also National Trail Mix Day. The best trail mix is the one that does not have coconut shavings, but does have M&Ms.
Fair enough. And so you can be aware about overdoses while eating trail mix outside. And if for some reason the spirit moves you, then love for a litigating lawyer.
Sure. Whatever may come.
But we're not actually talking about any of that in today's episode. Instead, we are talking about, what are we talking about?
Today, we are talking about skepticism versus denialism, which I feel like it is the ultimate struggle for the scientists in today's world.
Fair enough. And I think for a long time, probably, as well.
Yes.
Wasn't sure how to say that diplomatically, but it's a thing.
Yes.
We'll put it that way. And actually, we kind of have some stories, I think, to help couch this in the reality in which we exist. So the first one is that the president of South Africa from 1999 to 2008, whose name the internet told me is pronounced Thabo Mbeki, was persuaded by an AIDS denialist named Peter Duesberg, who argued against the effectiveness of antiretroviral drugs, which were shown to be effective for helping manage AIDS. Okay.
Sure.
So essentially, this Peter guy was the worm tongue in his ear, telling him that these don't work or he shouldn't use them, that sort of thing.
That was a really good Lord of the Rings reference, by the way.
Thank you.
I like that.
Appreciate that. And he was more than that. He was full-blown AIDS denier. It doesn't exist. It's not linked to HIV, that sort of thing. But this anti-intellectual campaign that he waged, that he was sort of in the ear of Mbeki, successfully prevented Mbeki, the president, from implementing a treatment program with the antiretrovirals that was implemented throughout the country. He just did nothing. And because they chose to do nothing, this caused an estimated 330,000 unnecessary deaths.
That's awful.
From complications from this. Yeah, like this was preventable, but denialism killed, a third of a million people.
Yeah. And that's not the only example of this, right? So in 2017 in Minnesota, the Somali American community suddenly experienced an outbreak of childhood measles because there had been a successful anti-vaccine campaign pushing the false and repeatedly discredited claim that the MMR vaccine causes autism. We've heard this argument plenty of times. It's been disproved many, many times.
Yeah.
Now, what this resulted in was a substantial decrease in vaccination rates. And measles, by the way, has no cure, causes severe illness, is aggressively contagious, and can result in death, and is 100% preventable with the vaccine. So let me say that again. It is 100% preventable. Like, it is so preventable that it's essentially could be eliminated from the planet with the vaccine. But this anti-vaccine campaign really kind of brought it to the forefront again.
Yeah, we could get rid of it, but people chose to hang on to measles. They're like, no, we like that disease. Let's keep that one around.
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania, in the United States, on November 6th, 2016, a 2-year-old girl develops a cold and then pneumonia. Now, she had about a 95% chance or greater of surviving this cold, this pneumonia, if she were to receive normal medical intervention. This is very common, commonly treated, commonly thing that happens. However, her parents were very religious, and their religious beliefs both denied that medicine was appropriate, useful, and effective, and also their religion forbid the use of medicine. And so this 2-year-old girl died of pneumonia 2 days later. And the parents attributed this to, it was God's will, they said, and that in their religion, it is frowned upon to use medicine. And you look at the situation, and I feel like I just got to ask, like, what should be the outcome of this? What do we do here? You know, what did happen is that they were charged with, and I believe convicted of, I know at least charged with, I don't recall if it was convicted, but I believe they were convicted of the involuntary manslaughter and also child endangerment. And I just feel like there's probably a big conversation beyond what I intended to bring up today, but just the fact that sort of approach exists.
Yeah.
And thinking about, like, I mean, they're already a family grieving the death of a child, which no parent should ever have to go through. And it's also like completely their fault.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's just, what do we do, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I think this kind of leads into a big part of what we're trying to discuss here, right? Which is that in these circumstances, there is a rise of denialism, and it is a significant problem. It's impactful. And once you get past the kind of emotional part of that, right? Like your emotional reaction is that shouldn't have happened, and those parents should be held accountable. And while we agree to some degree, right? Like we have to, our goal here today is to really talk about the idea of how we even get here. There is a pernicious and seemingly growing problem of denialism, whether it's due to religion, whether it's due to just anti-science or some other kind of thing, right? And importantly, in this discussion, this is not skepticism. Denialism and skepticism are two very different things. A lot of times what will happen is deniers will claim that they are skeptics, and that's just not what it is. Being a skeptic and being a denier are two very different things, and we're going to try to unpack that today.
Yeah, that's essentially the crux of this discussion. We'll talk a lot about denialism and the implications of it and that sort of thing. But the main central idea here is showing that denialism is not skepticism. And so part of what we're going to do is we're going to define what denialism is, contrast it with skepticism, walk through types of denialism and like strategies that denialists use, and also talk about what, if anything, that we can do about this as it currently exists. But before we actually move on, Shane, you said a word back there I think it'd be useful to define. What does pernicious mean?
So pernicious is an adjective, and it is having a harmful effect, especially in a gradual or subtle way. So essentially what is happening with denialism is that it has a harmful effect, but it's kind of very insidious. It's very it's kind of creeping in, and it's gradual, and over time it seems pretty subtle, but it has a larger impact. I
like to use pernicious in the camp of like insidious and pernicious. They can go together nicely when you're describing something.
Yeah, especially something like this.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into our definitions here and understand, give a thorough background on sort of what denialism is and how it contrasts with skepticism.
Yeah, so denial is to refuse something or to state something claimed to be true is not actually true. So a lot of us are in denial of a lot of things, but it's not really good in this particular context.
Yeah, we commonly deny things all the time. And I think just denying things by itself is not necessarily a problem.
Right.
Denialism, however, is the deliberate, often psychologically motivated neglect of information that would be too upsetting or anxiety provoking to allow into one's belief system. And that's actually a direct quote from Paul Applebaum, the former head of the American Psychiatric Association. I've also seen people describe denialism as denial writ large. And I think that from all of the reading that I did in preparation for this, I would essentially summarize the definitions of denialism as belief in a position contrary to the evidence and consensus. There's a lot of important things in there, but we'll kind of unpack that as we go through more of the background.
Yeah. Do you think Paul wears jeans?
I don't know.
Applebaum jeans?
Applebaum jeans. Probably.
That was such a dumb joke. We have sunk to a new low on this one. So Keith Con Harris of The Guardian says, quote, denialism is a mix of corrosive doubt and corrosive credulity, end quote. I think that's a nice kind of lead into the next part of this.
Yeah. So we need to define skepticism also, because if we're going to contrast it, then we have to know how they're defined differently. So important thing to understand about skepticism is that all skepticism is scientific skepticism in the way that we're talking about it today. And scientific skepticism is only accepting claims provisionally and in proportion to that claim's support from valid logic and fair and thorough assessment and available evidence. I am paraphrasing that heavily from a book that I used as part of the supporting text for this discussion, which is the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe book. So it's not a direct quote, but it does very closely mirror their definition of skepticism.
I like it. Now, these two concepts are conceptually, debatably opposites. And as we kind of go forward and we start to unpack, you'll see what we mean. Now, skepticism refutes claims that are logically incoherent or lack sufficient evidence, where denialism specifically refutes the claims that are logically sound and have sufficient evidence. So, to be clear, skepticism will say, that doesn't make any sense. Show me the evidence that proves that. Oh, it still doesn't make any sense because there's not evidence. Okay, we're going to move forward. Where denialism will say, that sounds like it makes sense. I'm going to go ahead and deny it outright, and then we're going to move forward from there and then just continue to accept the alternative fact, if you will, about that particular concept or discussion.
Yeah, exactly. Now, some commonly cited examples of denialism, I'm going to basically just go through a list of some sort of current and past examples of denialism campaigns. So one is rejecting the evidence for anthropogenic, which is human-caused, climate change, evolution as a process by which humans came to be, that the Holocaust happened, that AIDS is linked to HIV, or that AIDS exists at all, is another one we mentioned earlier, that vaccines are safe and effective and do not cause other mental health complications, autism. They reject the germ theory of disease, that the earth is spherical, that Barack Obama was born in the United States, that the US 2020 election was a free and fair election and did not have widespread voter fraud, that the COVID virus was real, and a million other things about the COVID virus, that humans have landed on the moon, the safety and necessity of genetically modified organisms or GMO, or that Beyonce is a national treasure.
Yeah, anybody who argues Beyonce is not a national treasure, we're going to have some different conversations. But I think, when you start to unpack this and look at it, what's important here isn't just the topics. It's that these topics are understood and that they are well researched and that there is a general consensus among scientists. What ends up happening is the denialist position then must be to understand at least the basic position and take a position that the conclusions provided are false. So essentially, for everything that we just said, right? So climate change is not real. Evolution is not a thing that happened. The Holocaust never happened, and AIDS is not real, so on and so forth. You'll see kind of they take the opposite of these true verifiable events and say, no, that's not real.
Right. That's a short, truncated list. And I think pretty much all conspiracy theories will generally belong to that list as well. And so anyway, denialism, therefore, is not simply questioning or rejecting ideas. It is actively choosing to believe in a position for which there is little or no evidence, directly counter to the position that has substantial evidence and logical coherence. So it is understanding that you're choosing this position that lacks evidence and logical coherence.
Right.
Because the opposition has evidence and logical coherence.
Yeah.
Right.
Essentially, you not only just refute it, but you make an argument like why somebody else might want to spout facts, right? Like, why would anybody want to believe the earth is round? Like, and they'll basically take that and turn that argument and do all kinds of stuff.
We'll talk about the pernicious and insidious nature of denialism right after we hear some denialism from the sponsors. Don't believe a word of what they said. We're back.
So the denialism orientation is mind-bogglingly insidious because denialists have historically cloaked their activities as scientific and frequently cherry-pick a few examples that exist as sufficient evidence to essentially cast complete doubt. They'll find one study that's a flawed study. They will find some argument about some contextual thing that whatever it might be. They will find something to cast out, and then they'll amplify that one thing. They'll magnify it. They'll turn it into the argument against scientific consensus.
Right. And furthermore, there have been instances in the past where powerful groups have, in fact, obfuscated the truth to support their narrative. that best fits them or their employers. There's actually a quote in here that I really like, which is, quote, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it." End quote. And that's by Upton Sinclair. And I feel like that really captures exactly this, right? Is one of the motivations that we'll get to later is that these people are often paid to believe or to portray that they believe in a certain thing. So basically what I'm saying here is that in the past, there have been the majority groups were those that were essentially pushing a false narrative, and the actual legitimate critical skeptical scientists were the ones in the minority. And so what happens is the deniers can use the fact that that has happened to say that that could be happening now to every problem that they want.
Right. There's a lot of strategies to make denialists look legit too. So another one is that what'll end up happening is they'll enlist intelligent, highly credentialed experts or people that sound intelligent, have a wide enough vocabulary that they can put together a bunch of, mumbo jumbo and make them sound like they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But what they'll actually do is they'll appropriate these people to their side, to the side of deniers, so that the denialist position actually carries kind of a veneer of validity. I really like that term, by the way, veneer of validity.
Oh, yeah.
By having real experts, if you will, or ex-experts on their side. I'm going to go ahead and call out our mortal enemy here. Jordan Peterson is an example of this.
Yeah.
Like the denialist side, the QAnon side, those folks have enlisted him to fight against the quote-unquote woke culture, even though there's plenty of evidence to suggest that what he says is incorrect, harmful, problematic, all of those things that go on with him.
Dr. Oz, I think, also falls into this camp. This is someone who was actually a very intelligent person who was really good at their job and legitimately earned their credentials and degree. And now he's become, and I mean, has been for many years now, but like he's been
a parody.
Like way outside of like science-based medicine for a long time, and has now shifted that to like alt-right conspiracy nut as well.
Yeah.
And so, there's just another example of that sort of thing. Another way that this denialism can be so insidious is that denialists will often claim to be the victims, and that the suppression of their side of things by the mainstream scientists and media and whatnot is the conspiracy to keep the truth under wraps. And so they're they're sort of cloaking it in these layers of making themselves seem legitimate or attempting to.
Yeah, I would like to point out too the parallel of that particular thing that the denialists are the victims and the truth is being suppressed. There's a parallel with that, and then cult leaders. Just so you know, like you can see a very clear parallel. Like you hear cult leaders say, like, "Come join us. We know, we know the truth, and they won't let you have it because da 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 da." Honestly, though, I don't know that there might be some legitimacy to that, because I think Dr. Oz, he might be denied the truth because he might not have ever had the information on how to make a crudité. So fair. Like he may have never had that education. So like as smart as he is, maybe the truth on how to make a crudité is hidden from him, and he's upset by that.
That might be it. I think he may have solved it.
I think that's what's going on with him. Now, also, because denialists are beholden to no set of principles or ethics or morals or even the lowest bar of human decency, they can happily couch their position in layers of honesty, manipulation, self-depreciation, humility, humor, or whatever happens to be popular on TikTok or Twitter at the moment.
Yeah. And actually, so there's some very specific examples of that thing right there. So there was a leaked memo from executives at a tobacco company. And this was years and years ago. This is more during the push to before a lot of the bans on cigarettes and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so there was a leaked memo from the executives at a tobacco company that explained in the memo, this internal memo, quote, "Doubt is our product," end quote, while they were engaging in these anti-science campaigns. So they fully understood. They didn't even believe their own rhetoric. Their own point was, if we can sow doubt about tobacco products, we can continue to sell our products. And so what we're marketing is doubt about these things.
And that's the thing, is that just a little bit of doubt is enough to get a large population behind you. Right.
Yeah.
And this is just some examples of how this happens. Andrew Anglin, who runs a Holocaust denial website, put it this way in a leaked memo to his writers. And this is directly quoted from Andrew Anglin from the memo.
Yeah. And actually, fair trigger warning, this contains a racial slur.
Yeah, this is real bad. And I will edit that because I won't say that.
That's good.
The quote is, "The unindoctrinated should not be able to tell if we are joking or not. There should also be a conscious awareness of mocking stereotypes of hateful racists. I usually think of this as self-depreciating humor. I am a racist making fun of stereotypes of racists because I don't take myself super seriously. This is obviously a ploy, and I actually do want to gas insert racial slur here, but that's neither here nor there," end quote. That's a direct quote from Andrew Anglin, who runs a Holocaust denial website. It's mind-blowing that these people still exist.
Yeah, and I mean, so you can see right there that they know the game. The game is that by us looking like we're joking and not taking ourselves seriously, we recruit people to be entertained by our side.
Yeah.
They're like, we make it seem like we're making a joke, even though we like legitimately are anti-Semitic as their position. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we're going to like couch it as the sort of fun, bantery sort of thing. We're going to normalize this type of thing. And this is part of the reason that the people are sort of like, let's just not use a lot of hateful slurs as jokes, because doing so legitimizes those hate campaigns, basically.
Right.
Anyway, finally, and maybe one of the worst things about the insidiousness of the denialism approach is that the only thing that denialism needs to win is to exist at all.
Mm-hmm.
Sowing seeds of doubt, whether they're contradicted or not, it will recruit people to their side. It supports their economic niche, furthers their apocalyptic agenda or whatever their motivation might be. And it also fundamentally undermines thoughtful, logical inquiry and intellectual productivity, because all it needs to do is plant the seed of the idea that these things that have evidence and logical coherence should be doubted for some reason. That's all it needs.
Mm-hmm.
And every day that somebody doesn't vaccinate their child is a win for that side.
Yep.
Every day that someone who's interested in the moon landings Googles it and gets a search hit that pulls up the denialist position that we didn't land on the moon, that's a win.
Yeah.
And so all it needs to do is exist. And that's one of the worst things about it.
Yeah. And that's what's so upsetting about trying to live in a world where you are constantly having the conversation with people where, you know, like you might have had the conversation with somebody that says something and you're like, that doesn't even literally make any sense.
Yeah.
I just had the conversation not too long ago about kind of what's going on in the news with former president. And everybody that is like on that guy's side has said, "Oh, it's just they're just trying to make an example of him. They're setting him up." I'm like, no, they legitimately found this stuff. Like like there is evidence that this stuff was found, and why would it doesn't make any sense? And so it's just that argument of like, there's always an excuse for why the truth is not the truth.
Yeah.
So ultimately, what we've said up to this point is a lot of ranting, and we get emotional about this. At least I do.
Yeah, same.
And ultimately, what we're saying is this is not skepticism. Skepticism is a legitimate thing. Skepticism is constantly monitoring and self-evaluating for bias, weighing the evidence. And I want to be clear about that. Evidence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actual evidence.
Yeah. Actual evidence, not something that like a guy building a rocket in his backyard uses to like prove the earth is flat. Like actual evidence. And then asking the question, how would I know if this were true? And that's the question that we kind of always ask as skeptics.
Yeah.
To be skeptical means constantly triaging claims into levels of believability, but it also means being confident in one's beliefs because there is ample reason to be confident. And that's another part of this, ample reason to be confident. I have sufficient evidence to support my claims and my beliefs about this thing. That also means that you're open to learning new things, and that can and will adjust your beliefs. So you will not only say, this is what I understand of the world, and you could say, this is what you're really saying is, this is what I understand of the world and the truth as it is today.
Right.
With new evidence, that will shift and change based on new evidence.
Precisely.
Not a lack of evidence.
And this ultimately, I think, is a good thing. Learning from evidence and learning from our mistakes is a good thing. And it is not the position of denialism. Again, it's sort of how they're opposites, is that denialism just digs in their heels. And another thing that's important here that I think it's going to come back around when we talk about what we can do about this is that scientific skepticism and denialism are not playing the same game here.
Right.
Like, and so I'm going to take this metaphor way beyond where it makes sense. So just bear with me for a second. So like scientific skepticism has rules and an objective to be effective and productive. Like that's kind of the game that scientific skepticism is playing. Denialism has no rules and an objective simply to get people's attention. Like that's part of how they're opposites. And then,
right.
So while the science team is like running drills and exercising and working on their formations and their plays, the denialism team is taking steroids, rigging the scoring machine, poisoning the other team, and sharpening their knives with which they'll stab their opponents once they get on the field together.
Sure.
The denialists don't even care that much about winning, just about the blood and carnage they'll leave on the field and the fans they'll gather along the way. So it's just not the same game, right? Like the scientists show up to play a game and the denialists show up to stab them to death.
Right. I think this is one of the most important points about this is a lot of times what will happen is like scientists and skeptics will try to argue with denialists. And the truth is that you're not playing by the same rules. You are simply playing within a set of guidelines that do not exist for the other people.
Yeah.
And that is probably, as a scientist myself, one of the most frustrating things about having these conversations.
Yeah.
I have had conversations with like people in my own family where we've discussed, whatever politics are going on. And I'm like, I will present glaring evidence for the thing that I'm making. And they're like, no, that's not real. And I'm just like, all they have to say is no. And I'm like, I can't. Like I got to a point where I was like, you can't come to my house anymore. The problem with that is like, it is so frustrating because like we know as skeptics that we're like, there are specific rules and guidelines and laws by which the world works. And so much of that follows logic and evidence. And if we don't have that, it's mind-blowing how people get to where they're going.
Yeah.
I guess.
Very much so. Yeah, exactly.
So it actually must be somewhat exhausting, like I mentioned before, trying to constantly push back against the avalanche of logic and evidence that keeps stacking up against you, or at least I would think so. But what ends up happening is denialists just don't care. They're just like I'm telling you, it's as simple as, nah. And then just kind of like leave it at that and just let the fires burn. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit as kind of whatever goes next. But in the meantime, we would implore you all to take a quick break and avoid the wares that are about to be hawked at you from our sponsors.
Now, we have been talking about essentially the major distinction between skepticism and denialism and the various, I think, aspects of denialism that make it so difficult to do anything about. But what's interesting here is that the timeline is there seems to be a change in the winds, if you will, because denialism has been around for a very long time, possibly as long as we've had language.
Yeah.
And who knows all the shifts that it has gone through over time. But we kind of we seem to be in the middle of a new one now. Many denialists have gotten increasingly savvy, for one thing. A small cadre of once upon a time scientists turned climate change deniers have founded these reasonable sounding organizations to surreptitiously spread misinformation. One example of how they've gotten increasingly savvy is like they were just pushing the rhetoric in like media platforms and whatnot, but then they're like, well, we can add an air of legitimacy to this by starting these organizations. So for example, Fred Singer was a climate change denier who spent years downplaying the effects of climate change, various logical fallacies employed, etc. And I'm not going to go into all of those. Mm-hmm. But he founded this institute called the Science and Environmental Policy Project.
Interesting.
Listen to that name. Like you're going to hear that. Yeah, you're think like, yeah, I'm on that guy's side. So he founded this in 1990. And it pushes all their climate change denialism. And their website, while spectacularly antiquated in its appearance, seems to be active at least as recently as 2019. And so that's sort of where they're at, is that like these organizations are out there. They have these very legitimate sounding names, and they're actually being run by these pseudoscience, like often corporate shills that are pushing their own specific agenda that is not scientific.
Right. This is different than Andrew Wakefield doing guest speaking appearances on cruise ships sandwiched between somebody who is teaching an astral projection workshop in a hypnosis clinic, right? So this is a very different scenario because he's been delegitimized in the public eye for so long that it's hard to kind of come back from that. But, folks like Fred S. Singer and the Science and Environmental Policy Project or the eponymous George C. Marshall Foundation all kind of have like an air of legitimacy, right? So the George C. Marshall Foundation was an anti-climate change conservative think tank that ran from 1984 to 2015. And now I want to say this out loud as a reminder. This has been going on for some time. Climate change deniers have existed for decades.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, this organization, the George C. Marshall Foundation, started in 1984. It's older than us.
Yeah, right. There's another person named David Irving. He's a Holocaust denier, and he was actually imprisoned in Austria for libel due to his very public denouncements of the Holocaust and the harm that it caused. But he used his imprisonment to push the narrative that, quote, Jews are in power, end quote, and that they were in control of the flow of information and that he was instead the victim. So coming back to that, right? And he's actually since only become increasingly unapologetically anti-Semitic and continued to push his beliefs and his Holocaust denial and stuff online and maintained a level of popularity. So even though he was in a position before where he was like convicted and went to prison for this, all it did was add fuel to the fire for him, and he was able to spin it to his advantage.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, you know, in a situation like that where there is a nebulous dark enemy that you can't see and you can't see the machinations, if you will, like it's really easy to kind of weave a story like that and then, you know, enlist people to your side, right? It makes sense that like this person is going, you know, I didn't do this. They're in power. So blah, 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 blah. And now you've got kind of like, that's why, you know, you always hear people go, oh, they're out to get you or they're watching. And it's like, okay, well, who is they? When you ask a denialist, who is they?
Yeah.
They can't ever answer.
It's the shadow government.
It's the shadow government and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's the dark. Yeah. Anyway, as we mentioned before, there seems to be a shift in denialism, which I think is really important to note. So, as Guardian writer Keith Conn Harris pointed out, the denialists used to carefully build campaigns of doubt over years or even decades. So there was a lot of structure, a lot of like meticulous work around this. They carefully constructed a case of confusion, you know, alliteration intended, that they would then use to stand their ground and attract attention. But what we end up seeing is kind of this new era. In 2012, Donald Trump tweeted that climate change was a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese to influence American businesses to adopt strategies that would make them less competitive. Where did this argument come from? Spurious musings intended to inflame an audience. That's all it is.
Yep.
Guy likes to just kind of throw fuel on a fire, right?
Yep.
There was some anti-climate change rhetoric that essentially claimed incorrectly that climate treaties would weaken the U.S. position and power, but Trump simply made up a false statement and no one batted an eye.
Yep.
And here we are today.
And the world has been shifting this way. Like there is this sudden aggressive swing into what Conn Harris described as lazy denialism or also post-denialism. And this new rhetoric essentially gambled that it could garner attention and support and spread on the foundation of doubt created by the sort of denialist forebearers. So the people who spent, you know, years and decades putting together their campaigns that denied the moon landing, that denied vaccines and that sort of thing, they laid enough of a doubt framework that now the new denialists, the lazy denialists, they don't have to do any work. They can just say whatever.
Yeah. And that's a real problem. I mean, that is where, you know, when, especially with, you know, just people finding information and not having the critical skills to research anything.
Yeah.
Or you've got organizations that put together a really good argument to make it look really official. It's very easy for people who lack the ability to kind of dig a little bit. It's very easy for people to buy into that stuff. I mean, that's how you get people to believe in stuff like this. And so it is becoming a real problem. So you're right. There is no hope.
Yeah. No, the shift is actually, as coming back to our vocab word here, is a pernicious one. And this wholesale destructive chaos of post-truth lazy denialism no longer even needs to attempt to be internally consistent. Like that's
Nope.
where we're at now. The modern denialist can contradict themselves 3 or 4 times in a single sentence and then be literally worshipped by their followers.
Yes.
They get to have their cake and eat it too, and then steal the cake from the others and eat that too, and then throw what they don't finish on the ground and then urinate on what remains so that nobody can scrape it up or salvage anything.
And then they tell you the cake never existed to begin with.
That's right. This is my overextended metaphor once again, but this episode I think lends itself well.
Yeah.
And what I mean by this is that they can claim, like just as an example, that vaccines are unsafe, then use Western medicine, evidence from Western medicine to support their position whenever it's convenient, right? While simultaneously accusing science of being speculative or even just fake. So doesn't matter. Just say science isn't real and that Western medicine supports your idea and that Western medicine isn't real and that Western medicine is good for you, good for whatever position they have, and that vaccines can cause autism and that you have to take this other vaccine that is for horses to stop worms.
Right.
And so it just like, it doesn't matter anymore. Like they just say whatever.
and this is the thing that's probably really frustrating, especially as scientists, where it's like, if you want to use science to back a claim, then you use all science, not some science. Like science and like good science is designed to answer a question. But if you cherry pick studies to answer a question and refute the other studies that make an argument against what your claim is, then you run into an issue of like, you are just creating chaos by denying whatever truth does exist that we know of at the time. So this anti-science, anti-human thing, these things that people might have whispered behind closed doors 10 years ago are now cheerfully spread on mainstream news. They are spread all over the internet, on social media, and people just take it at surface value. They look at it, they read it, and they go, okay, that's got to be what it is. Bill Clinton has got to be sucking down bottles of adrenochrome to get through his daily living. And you're just kind of like, how do we arrive here? Like, this doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah. Okay, we have just so much more to say about skepticism versus denialism.
So much.
Yeah, I think it would be appropriate to separate this into a two-parter. So we've just finished our part one. We're going to come back for a part two. We're going to talk about next time the motivations that I think foster denialism in several different spaces. And of course, there's different ones, but we try to enumerate those. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to actually dig into the specific tactics that denialism uses to influence people. And finally, we'll wrap up with what we can do about it. And then, of course, our take-home points and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we have some recommendations, but first, we have some sponsors.
Yay!
And we're back. We can end on some hopeful things here. We've got some recommendations.
I like recommendations.
Recommendations.
I am going to recommend something that is both very altruistic and simultaneously very selfish, and that is to do something nice for someone else. Mm-hmm. And why I say that this is selfish is because I've had the chance recently to do kind things for random strangers, and it feels so good to me. Like whenever I get to help somebody do something that it was like, I chose to volunteer my time or my effort in this moment. And it was usually a small thing, but it just felt really good. Like that person, I helped them get through their day a little better. And I just thought about it the rest of the day. I was like, oh, I'm really glad I did that. I really hope that they, things worked out for them and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so that's my recommendation is there's so much satisfaction that comes from helping someone or doing something nice for somebody. So I recommend it.
I fully support that. I think that's really a really nice, wholesome recommendation.
Thanks.
So my recommendation is going to piggyback on that because I think it's important to say that you should be able to do something nice for yourself too. So a lot of times we spend so much time, in the service of others and caring for others, and sometimes we forget to fill our own cup. I just had a conversation with a close friend of mine recently, and she was kind of going through a whole lot of different things, and she was worried about the care of this one person and worried about the care of this other person, and I was just kind of like, did you have any water today? And she was like, nope, did not drink any water. I was like, okay, maybe you should start there. So that seems like kind of a simple thing, but I very much so subscribe to the idea that you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you put somebody else's on.
Fair.
And so it is absolutely worth doing something nice for yourself. Forget all the negative self-talk where you say, do I deserve this? Yes, you do. And we are here. We are here today to give you permission to do something nice for yourself, small, large, or anywhere in between.
Okay, if you have something you would like to tell us about skepticism or denialism or about doing something nice for yourself or somebody else, we like to hear those things. You should email us at info@wwdwwdpodcast.com or reach out to us on the various social media platforms and we'll try to respond to you there. If you'd like to support the show, you can always buy some merch. Head to our merch store and grab a shirt or a jacket or a hoodie or a beanie or a water bottle or stickers or whatever. And you can support that thing and that helps us and it makes you look cool and all the good things. Or you can head over to Patreon and sign up and you get some bonus goodies every week as we release episodes. There's stuff that goes along with that behind the scenes kind of stuff that you get access to. Or I'll just yell your name out, which I'm about to do to a list of people.
Yes.
And the people who have already joined the ranks of our super fans who help us do this show include Amanda, Brad, the Daily BA, Joshua, Justin, Justine, Kelly, Kim, Kostia, Layla, Megan, Mike M, Mike T, Shauna, and Stephanie. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. It keeps the lights on.
But hey, if you don't want to support us financially for various reasons, and I know that there are a lot of them, you can still support us non-financially by leaving us a rating and review, or telling friends about us and that sort of thing, or simply buying vandalizing a billboard in your local area with our podcast. That's right.
Or stickers. You put stickers on things.
Probably shouldn't be promoting vandalism. I'll get in trouble. But yeah, I think that's all that I have for the wrap-ups there. Thank you so much to my team, which includes Justin, Shane, Selena, welcoming on our new people, Patrick and Jess. And of course, thanks to Kyle and Alan. I could not do this without my wonderful team of people. And thank you for recording with me today, Shane. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode. Am I missing anything or anything we need to add before we wrap up?
Thank you for doing the notes for this episode. Oh, you deserve some credit.
You're so welcome. It was my pleasure. What went down the wormhole on this one? It was really fun.
Yes. So far, so good.
Perfect. Well, then catch us for part 2 next time. The thrilling conclusion. I actually think that we're going to really get into some awesome stuff talking about the tactics of denialism. That'll be a really good part.
Yeah.
So make sure you catch part 2. Otherwise, I think that's all we have. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.